Hi there, welcome to lesson number 3. We're going to start in on Call of the Wild and continue reading in chapter 1. Okay, before we get too much into the lesson today, I'd like you to go back to your vocabulary chart in the front of your blue book and check for this word anthropomorphize. If you have a definition written for this word, great, you can move on to the next slide. If you do not have this word written down, a definition for it, I'd like you to take some time and go ahead and fill out that vocabulary chart for the word anthropomorphize. I will check it at the end of the week to see that you've got this word with all of its definitions and all of those things filled out. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, so yesterday, or at least last lesson, what we did is we read the beginning of the Call of the Wild and we characterized Buck based on the textual evidence. Again, so important that we use the text as evidence when we are describing a character. Today, we're going to continue reading, discussing, and defining words in context. That means where we find them in the text with the text in chapter 1 of the Call of the Wild. We're going to continue to analyze how Buck's experiences and interactions reveal aspects of his character. So we're going to continue to look at how is his character developed through this story, and we're going to analyze the author's word choice and its impact on tone. So what you're going to need for this lesson is the Call of the Wild. You'll need your book. Make sure it has your number on it. You have the correct copy checked out to you. Your split page notes for chapter 1, which is going to be page 15 and 16 in your blue book. Pages 15 and 16 in your blue booklet. And your vocabulary chart at the beginning of your book, blue book. And some conversation stems. We probably won't use that today. We'll save that for another time. Okay, so we're going to start on page 6. So if you want to go ahead and turn in Call of the Wild to page 6, where we left off last time, it's about halfway down the page. It's the paragraph that starts, "But the saloon keeper let him alone." So I'm going to continue reading. Make sure you're there. If you're not there yet, pause the video and come back to me. Okay, so we're going to read for pages 6 to 8. But the saloon keeper let him alone, and in the morning 4 men entered and picked up the crate. More tormentors, Buck decided, for they were evil-looking creatures, ragged and unkempt, and he stormed and raged at them through the bars. They only laughed and poked sticks at him, which he promptly assailed with his teeth till he realized that that was what they wanted. Whereupon he lay down sullenly and allowed the crate to be lifted into a wagon. Then he and the crate in which he was imprisoned began a passage through many hands. Clerks in the express office took charge of him. He was carted about on another wagon. A truck carried him, with an assortment of boxes and parcels, upon a ferry steamer. He was trucked off the steamer into a great railway depot, and finally he was deposited in an express car. For 2 days and nights this express car was dragged along at the tail of shrieking locomotives. And for 2 days and nights Buck neither ate nor drank. In his anger he had met the first advances of the express messengers with growls, and they had retaliated by teasing him. When he flung himself against the bars, quivering and frothing, they laughed at him and taunted him. They growled and barked like detestable dogs, mewed and flapped their arms and crowed. It was all very silly, he knew, but therefore the more outrage to his dignity. And his anger waxed and waxed. He did not mind the hunger so much, but the lack of water caused him severe suffering, and fanned his wrath to fever pitch. For that matter, high-strung and finely sensitive, the ill treatment had flung him into a fever, which was fed by the inflammation of his parched and swollen throat and tongue. He was glad for one thing. The rope was off his neck. That had given him an unfair advantage, but now that it was off, he would show them. They would never get another rope around his neck. Upon that he was resolved. For 2 days and nights he neither ate nor drank, and during those 2 days and nights of torment he accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. His eyes turned bloodshot, and he was metamorphosed into a raging fiend. So changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him, and the express messengers breathed with relief when they bundled him off the train at Seattle. 4 men gingerly carried the crate from the wagon into a small, high-walled backyard. A stout man with a red sweater that sagged generously at the neck came out and signed the book for the driver. That was the man, Buck divined, the next tormentor. And he hurled himself savagely against the bars. The man smiled grimly and brought a hatchet and a club. "You ain't gonna take him out now?" the driver asked. "Sure," the man replied, driving the hatchet into the crate for a pry. There was an instantaneous scattering of the 4 men who had carried it in, and from safe perches on top of the wall they prepared to watch the performance. I'm going to stop right there. Okay, so we just finished reading through page 8. It's almost like the second paragraph on page 8 where it says watch the performance. That's where we ended. Now, within that reading, there's a little section here with a word that we need to put in our vocabulary chart. So the word is here on the screen. It's in bold. If you would pause the video right here and go ahead and write this word in your chart, then we'll come back and talk about it. Go ahead and pause the video. All right, thank you for doing that. So you've written down the word metamorphosed in the front of your blue notebook. And let's read this passage. It says, "He was metamorphosed into a raging fiend. So changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him, and the express messengers breathed with relief when they bundled him off the train at Seattle." So let's look at this word. You probably recognize a couple pieces here. This word right here, morph. And you might recognize the word meta. So when we talk about the meaning of this word, morph means to change, okay? And so here we have this word repeated here. Morph means to change. These are the same meaning. And meta means in a big way, okay? It means in a big way or in a very significant way. So I'll write the word big here. So it can mean big or a very significant way. So being changed in a very important, massive way is what this word means. You might recognize this word as a butterfly. You know, butterflies go through metamorphosis. Now, I didn't realize this, but a friend of mine told me that like baby humans, most animals in general, when they're born, even before they're born, when they're forming inside of their mothers, it's only a couple weeks old that human beings, we already have all of our bones, we have our fingernails, we've got our facial features are starting to develop, we've got a brain, a heart, kidneys, and all that, and we just take the same form and we just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we grow. That's not the way it is with butterflies. Butterflies, something very different happens. They first start out as like a caterpillar or an egg. I guess an egg hatches into a caterpillar. The caterpillar is one creature, and then what it does is it weaves a cocoon around itself or forms a chrysalis, and inside of that chrysalis it doesn't grow wings. That's not what happens. What it does is it completely melts and dissolves into a bunch of goo. Like if you were to cut one open early, it just looks like boogers. It's not a caterpillar at all. It's not a butterfly at all. It's all the genetic information has all been rearranged. And then slowly it starts to piece itself back together into a brand new creature, which is the butterfly. So when we say metamorphosed, this is not changing the way a human being changes, like from a little kid to an adult. This is like changing from one creature to another. So I want you to think about this word choice here. Why is this word significant to the story? Why is this word significant to the character of Buck? Let's go ahead and pause here, and I want you to go ahead and fill out the rest of that vocabulary chart now that you have an idea of what this word means. Don't advance to the next slide until you fill out the rest of that vocabulary chart for metamorphosed. Okay, we are jumping back into the book now. We're going to start at page 8 where we left off right near the top with the line Buck rushed, and then we're going to end on page 10 where it says in the struggle for mastery. So follow along in the book. Again, make sure your eyes are following along with me as I read, or if you want to pause the video and actually just read on your own, you may do that as well. All right, page 8. Pause if you need time to get there. Okay. Buck rushed at the splintering wood, sinking his teeth into it, surging and wrestling with it. Wherever the hatchet fell on the outside, he was there on the inside, snarling and growling, as furiously anxious to get out as the man in the red sweater was calmly intent on getting him out. "Now, you red-eyed devil," he said, when he had made an opening sufficient for the passage of Buck's body. At that same time he dropped the hatchet and shifted the club to his right hand. And Buck was truly a red-eyed devil, as he drew himself together for the spring, hair bristling, mouth foaming, a mad glitter in his bloodshot eyes. Straight at the man he launched his 140 pounds of fury, surcharged with the pent passion of 2 days and nights. In midair, just as his jaws were about to close on the man, he received a shock that checked his body and brought his teeth together with an agonizing clip. He whirled over, fetching the ground on his back and side. He had never been struck by a club in his life, and did not understand. With a snarl that was part bark and more scream, he was again on his feet and launched into the air, and again the shock came, and he was brought crushingly to the ground. This time he was aware that it was the club, but his madness knew no caution. A dozen times he charged, and as often the club broke the charge and smashed him down. After a particularly fierce blow, he crawled to his feet, too dazed to rush. He staggered limply about, the blood flowing from his nose and mouth and ears. His beautiful coat sprayed and flecked with bloody slaver. Then the man advanced and deliberately dealt him a frightful blow on the nose. All the pain he had endured was as nothing compared with the exquisite agony of this. With a roar that was almost lion-like in its ferocity, he again hurled himself at the man, but the man, shifting the club from right to left, coolly caught him by the under jaw, at the same time retching downward and backward. Buck described a complete circle in the air, and half of another, then crashed to the ground on his head and chest. For the last time he rushed, the man struck the shrewd blow he had purposely withheld for so long, and Buck crumpled up and went down, knocked utterly senseless. "He's no slouch at dog-breaking, that's what I say," one of the men on the wall cried enthusiastically. "Druther break Caius any day, and twice on Sundays," was the reply of the driver, as he climbed on the wagon and started the horses. Buck's senses came back to him, but not his strength. He lay where he had fallen, and from there he watched the man in the red sweater. "Answers to the name of Buck," the man soliloquized, quoting from the saloon keeper's letter, which had announced the consignment of the crate and contents. "Well, Buck, my boy," he went on in a genial voice, We've had our little ruction, and the best thing we can do is to let it go at that. You've learned your place, and I know mine. Be a good dog, and I'll go well, and the goose hang high. Be a bad dog, and I'll whale the stuffin' out of you. Understand?" As he spoke, he fearlessly patted the head, and he had so mercilessly pounded. And though Buck's hair involuntarily bristled at the touch of the hand, he endured it without protest. When the man brought him water, he drank eagerly, and later bolted a generous meal of raw meat, chunk by chunk, from the man's hand. He was beaten, he knew that, but he was not broken. He saw, once for all, that he stood no chance against a man with a club. He had learned the lesson, and in all his after life he never forgot it. That club was a revelation. It was his introduction to the reign of primitive law, and he met the introduction halfway. The facts of life took on a fiercer aspect, and while he faced that aspect uncowed, he faced it with all the latent cunning of his nature aroused. As the days went by, other dogs came in crates, and at the ends of ropes, some docilely, some raging and roaring as he had come, and once and one and all he watched them pass under the domination of the man in the red sweater, again and again, as he looked at each brutal performance. The lesson was driven home to Buck. A man with a club was a lawgiver, a master to be obeyed, though not necessarily conciliated. Of this last Buck was never guilty, though he did see beaten dogs that fawned upon the man, and wagged their tails, and licked his hand. Also he saw one dog that would neither conciliate nor obey, finally killed in the struggle for mastery. We're going to stop there. Okay, we're going to go back and look at a section of the text, and I'm going to let you do this on your own. On page 8, about halfway down, the paragraph starts, "And Buck was truly a red-eyed devil." We're going to start there and reread the section of his beating, and answer on page 15. Page 15 in your blue notebook. Okay, so page 8 in Call of the Wild, and page 15 in your blue notebook. This section that's highlighted on the slide. I'd like you to answer these questions. Identify the sensory details, that's sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, hearing. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. Yeah, it's the 5 senses. Identify those sensory details used to describe Buck's beating, and how do these details make you feel as a reader? What was it like listening to that being read? And how does the author's use of these vivid, violent descriptions impact the tone and the mood of this text? So he chose these words very carefully to evoke a mood in us. So go ahead and answer those questions and come back to the slideshow when you're done. Okay, in this section we're going to examine what this word primitive means, and specifically in this context of the paragraph here. So if you would please go ahead and push pause on the video, and in your vocabulary chart you're going to write the word primitive, and you're going to define it as best you can. If you need help with it, that's fine, but think about what you know of this word primitive and look at the context here. So push the pause on the video, do that, and then come back. Okay, awesome, you're back. So you've written down what you think primitive means. And if you're not too sure, here's an idea. Primitive means the earliest form of something, okay? Usually ancient. It also means without a bunch of cultural customs on it. So let's look at the context here. It says, he was beaten. He knew that. But he was not broken. He saw, once for all, that he stood no chance against a man with a club. He had learned the lesson, and in all his afterlife he never forgot it. That club was a revelation. It was his introduction to the reign of primitive law, and he had met the introduction halfway. So here, what do you think this phrase primitive law means? The reign of primitive law. If we're talking about this context here, the reign. Okay, we're looking at the reign or the rule of something. I think we can realize that Buck realizes he's not in charge. He's not reigning anymore the way he reigned like a king at his first house where he grew up. Okay, so he was at the judge's house and he was reigning like a king. He's not king here. So go ahead and write down your thoughts and your ideas on page 15. Answer that question there. It says, what does the author mean by the phrase, the reign of primitive law? Give it your best guess. All right, this is the last piece of the lesson. You're going to complete the final box on your split page notes handout on page 16. So it's the page you were writing on, page 15. You'll turn it over, and then there on the back, you'll see this little box. Here it looks like a different page, but in your notes it's a separate page all by itself. So looks a little different, but it's okay. It's the same question. It says, consider the author's use of word choice and sensory details. Select a word, phrase, or sentence from chapter 1 that emphasizes Buck's return to a primitive state. Explain why you chose this phrase or sentence, given its impact on the reader. So we see Buck changing from, a pampered dog who lives like a king to now he's this wild animal. And before you do that, I'd like to consider the novel's epigraph. I'll read it to you one more time. Again, it's on page 1 of chapter 1 at the very beginning. If you want to follow along, you can pause it and turn there, then start up again. Okay, so we're at the epigraph, and as we think about Buck and how he's changed in this chapter, let's read this. Old longings nomadic sleep, chafing at custom's chain. Again, from its brumal sleep, wakens the faring strain. Okay, so that is what you're going to do. Finish this section on your notes on page 16. And all right, you have finished page 16. You are done writing on pages 15 and 16. You've got your vocabulary words, and you are done. So in this lesson, you continued reading chapter 1 of Call of the Wild. You also analyzed the author's tone and the word choice to emphasize Buck's return to a primitive state. Good job.